What's up guys, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, it is another career sit down talk video for you guys, but it is a little different from what I normally post on my channel. I thought it would be interesting to have some people come on and speak with you guys and share their own experiences about this career field. That way you guys can get a little bit more perspective besides just mine all the time. And so that's exactly what this video is. The first person that I will be speaking with will be my current manager, Cindy, and she will be sharing with you guys her background information, education, career, and any advice she has for anyone trying to come into this type of field. If you're new here, just a super brief background about myself. I have a bachelor's degree in biology. I got my first job in the lab in May of 2020 as a clinical laboratory technologist working in a CLIA lab. And the very beginning of November of 2021, I transitioned to a new lab working in an R&D department as a research associate. And Cindy became my manager around the tail end of December. So we have been working together for about 5 to 6 months now, and I love being on her team. We are on contrived samples team and early research development. And you will also see her talk about that a little bit more in the video, so don't worry if you don't know what that is right now. Before we get into the video, make sure you're subscribed to my channel, that way you don't miss any more uploads like this. If you like this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and leave a comment down below letting me know what you guys think of this video. Do you guys want to see more of this, or if you have any follow-up questions for Cindy or I? And without any further ado, let's get right into the video. So the first question I have is just tell us about yourself and your background, your current role, and just about yourself.
Sure. So, I did my undergrad in biology, in Spanish actually, and then from there, I went to a really tiny college in Michigan, so I went to Aquinas College, and then from there I went to Central Michigan University to get my master's degree, and I did my degree in conservation genetics. Mm-hmm. So originally I was very interested in animal ecology and population genetics, mm-hmm. and my favorite part about that was that I got to do field work, but then I also had the lab component as well. Mm-hmm. So it'd be like, you'd go and do some of that, and then you'd come and bring it into the lab and have to do all the analysis, because I really enjoy the lab side as well. Mm-hmm. And then from there, I actually moved out to Baltimore, and then was really just trying to find a job somewhere. So I was in a fly lab doing protein work for a couple of years at Goucher, and then I went to the University of Maryland and did worked for 4 or 5 years there on human microbiome studies, and then I followed my boss to Germany and worked with him in Germany for a couple of years.
That's what I really hear.
Yep. So I had set up his lab and got it going at University of Maryland for Institute for Genome Sciences, mm-hmm. and then he was German and went back to Germany, or is German, he is German, and went back to Germany and basically said, do you want to come start my lab over there? Oh. So he offered me a job, and I came home and was like, talked to my husband, was like, hey, do you want to move to Germany for a couple of years? So we went there, and a number of the people that I had worked with at Institute for Genome Sciences over the years had come over to mm-hmm. So even while I was working there, I was kind of keeping an eye on the company, mm-hmm. and sort of had my sights set on getting a job here when I got back. Mm-hmm. And fortunately for me, that worked out already. I was like, this is where I'm going to go afterwards.
Yeah.
So I was in academia for about 15 years before switching over to industry.
You kind of spoke about this a little bit, but were you always interested in the cancer aspect, or did you always see yourself being in the research lab, or did you think you would stay with academia or head to CLIA or
So for me, it's interesting because I've known since I was little that I wanted to be in science, and mm-hmm. I knew in 9th grade that I wanted to go into biology. Okay. So this is what I'm going to do. And I knew I wanted to do research because I knew I didn't want to be a professor, and I mm-hmm. knew, or teacher, and I knew that I didn't want to be a doctor. Mm-hmm. But what was difficult for me is I didn't know what research meant. Mm-hmm. That's just sort of, I'm like, I want to do research, I want to work in a lab, but I didn't know what that was or what that meant or how to get there. Mm-hmm. So I think one of your questions, and this might be later, but to address it now, one of my biggest recommendations is if you're interested in doing something like this, mm-hmm. find either an undergraduate program that has a lot of research opportunities, because there are many places you go. Because like when I started my master's at CMU, there was all these different labs doing research, and like I came in and actually learned from the undergrads that were in our lab that had been there doing projects since they were like
The whole time.
freshmen or sophomores. And if I had been at an institution that had that opportunity, my trajectory may have been quite a bit different, but it just would have been good to get the experience earlier on. But yeah, so that's what I always recommend to people. And you know, if you're not necessarily in a university setting, finding programs that get you into, you know, actually into a lab and doing stuff, and not just like, I took a microbiology class and learned about this. And it's like, that's helpful, and that background knowledge is great, but really, you know, like you need like pipetter in hand, and like if you're going to be doing that sort of thing, because that was one thing that's helped me, is like if you know how to work with DNA and RNA, you can apply it to many different backgrounds. So I didn't come to cancer until I came here to I had zero background in that. And in fact, each of my different positions I've held, I actually didn't have really any experience in the background field that we were actually studying, like going to flies to human microbiome studies. But I can do DNA extractions, I know how to do PCR, and so knowing the techniques, but also like understanding like the background of a lot of that and how to apply it, and then being able to like learn the new application.
Yeah, that's how I felt. Well, at first I was like pre-med, but it was more so, I did like science, but I felt like you don't hear too much about other aspects of science really for the most part. So it was just like, I'll do pre-med. But then I was like, actually, like halfway through, I'm like, I don't want to go to med school. And I'm like, so what else am I going to do with a biology degree? So yeah, I think it would have been helpful more so a little early on to like know that there's different aspects to science, and like you were saying, like the research aspect.
Yeah, people used to, because I did biology and Spanish undergrad, they were like, are you going to go somewhere and like speak Spanish and be a doctor? And I'm like, no, that is not at all what I want to do.
Can you talk about a little bit about what our team does here before verification took over?
I can try. So, in general, I have always wanted to sort of be on the research side of things. I really like learning about assay or test development, and like, you know, how to optimize those things, how to break it, how to like, you know, so that you know how to improve it, or like once it gets into customers' hands, whatever they do to it, like you're like, oh, we've seen this before because we tried this. And then I'd like to continue to do a little bit more on the innovation side in terms of like continuing to find new things that I think maybe could be helpful in our workflows. But then, as you know, most of our focus in the past couple of months, and for me for the past couple of years, has been in contrived samples, which is really sort of a niche role in terms of, you could look around and I don't think it's a position that's going to be offered most places, available. But due to the limited availability of clinical patient samples or clinical plasma patient samples, we need to find ways to supplement our studies so that they can really be robust enough and have sample sizes that are sufficient to give us statistical power to say, yes, we can accurately and definitively detect these cancer mutations. So we take DNA from cell lines and use that to make contrived samples to mimic and essentially start our testing for assays on those.
For people who don't know what a contrived sample is, how would you like explain that in like the simplest way?
So we take cell lines that were made from cancer patients typically and extract DNA from those, and then go through a process to really make it look as much like a clinical patient sample as possible. And the nice thing about that is, because they're cell lines and you can grow them in the lab, you get a lot more DNA, a lot more quantity, which is one of our limiting factors, as well as we have the opportunity to combine different samples together. So instead of just looking at a single variant that one patient might have, we can put 10 variants together So you're really optimizing your workflows because sequencing is expensive. So we want to try and get as much information as possible out of each individual sample we run.
Yeah.
So our goal, our team, what we do is try and maximize that as much as possible, and while still maintaining our sanity. not true. We in the past have also had trouble with like trying to do capture too many things all at once, and it's like, just make two different things and we'll look at these two separately, but that's sort of balancing those things.
What is a typical day like for you?
It depends. So some days I can work from home and do all desk work, and but usually my day is a mixture of meetings, and then I would say I'm probably in the lab maybe 25% of the time now. Maybe a little bit more now that we have more things going on with the current verification studies. But a lot of my day is examining data, pulling numbers, trying to plan for the next steps, and then paperwork for the lab documentation side, and making sure, because we are creating these samples and mixing a number of things together, we want to have very clear line of sight to all of the steps in the process, so that when the FDA comes back and they're like, tell me about this one sample that Marissa made. We can.
That has all the notes on it.
We're like, no, don't look at that one. Use a different one. So that we have the proper documentation and just line of sight to the whole, every step in the process that sample has gone through and now is being used in the study. And then, meetings, depending. Some days are a lot of meetings. I still have a couple of days that have been mostly meeting free, but don't tell anybody about those.
Before they fill up.
Yeah, I'm like, shh, no.
Did you ever, I think you kind of answered this earlier, but did you ever consider a degree in like clinical laboratory science? Or did you were you aware of that type of degree?
I had no idea. I did not know that was a thing. I mean, again, I guess I sort of, I don't know if our career development there wasn't super involved. Like I had great instructors and things, but the school in general was just much more geared towards either pre-med or teaching. So I was sort of finding my way there a little bit.
Yeah.
But I mean, I knew about the doctor, RN, there are lots of different technical routes, but I had never heard of like a clinical clinical licensing that you can get and things like that. I was unaware of at the time.
What's your favorite part about this field, and what's your least favorite part?
That one was hard. I was like, I don't know. I mean, I like learning new things, and I like the iterative process of like, we did this test, we got data. What does this mean? How can we use this to move forward with the next steps? My least favorite part is when you get data back and you're like, so this didn't really tell us anything, or there's no dip. It's hard. It can be hard to interpret at times, and then deciding what the next steps are going to be always becomes then a lot more difficult. But it is part of the process. We're just like, well, all right, how else can I possibly answer these questions? So it's always making you like look for new pathways and hopefully not always do the same thing, which I appreciate.
What do you do outside of the lab?
So outside of the lab, what do I do? I'm pretty active. I do
a lot.
I do a lot of things. CrossFit, yoga, hiking. I like camping and outdoor times. And then I have a really great family group here in Baltimore where we spend a lot of time together doing, I don't know, all sorts of crazy things. Whatever trouble we can find.
And then do you feel like you have like a good work-life balance?
I do. I definitely try and make sure that I maintain that. And it ebbs and flows to some extent depending on timelines and where we are with stuff. And I feel like usually I'm not like taken advantage of in my position. So I don't mind if there's something that comes up like, oh, maybe I have to do this to make sure that I have all of my things ready for the week. So I don't mind working off hours occasionally, but it definitely doesn't tend to like interfere too much. I try and keep a pretty good balance because I'm much happier and it works better when you're not at work all the time.
Yeah. Are there any like fun or interesting stories you can share?
I was trying to think about this. I mean, it's not relevant to like what I do now, but like when I was in grad school, so one of the, so I was a TA, so I would teach microbiology classes, and that's what would pay for my school, and they gave me a stipend, whatever. But then oftentimes you don't necessarily have employment in the summer unless you get like a research grant or do whatever. So one year, one of the jobs I had was I did a roadkill survey.
Oh my goodness.
So in the summer, I would like twice a week, I would drive this old truck on this like 2-mile stretch of road and like GPS the location and then record the animal, and so that like we were looking for places where animals were crossing the road. We were like looking for animal corridors to see if there were correlations between like land use type. So like it makes sense, but I was like, and I was fine when I got to use the truck that said like CMU biology, but we had another like truck that was just like this old rickety red one. I just drive on the side of the road and like pull over, and but then you have to mark it so that you know you've already measured or like recorded it. So I'd be like spray painting a dead raccoon on the side of the road, and I was like, oh, people are gonna
driving
think
by like, what's this girl doing?
People are gonna think I'm really weird.
You answered this question, but I don't know if you have anything else to add, like any advice for someone getting into this type of field, or?
Yeah, again, that would be my main thing is if you know like early on and know that you'd like to be in a lab, really just look for institutions that have undergraduate research. But then, you know, there's also always internships and other opportunities. So really getting into a lab as early as possible, even if it's just like, you know, interning or volunteering, not really volunteering, because you can't really do that, but you know what I mean. Exploring opportunities with either industry or universities that might be near you is really the helpful way to start out. Or I guess alternatively finding like a mentor, but that can be definitely difficult to you know, just randomly reach out to people that you don't know to try and find a situation like that.
And then I have a bonus that I didn't send you.
All right.
It's just a quick this or that.
Okay.
So the first one is bench work or desk work?
Bench work. Even though I mostly do desk work.
Yeah. Academia or like, I guess clinical?
Ooh, interesting. I might do academia with that one.
Really?
Yeah.
And then big team or small team?
I like small team. Like our team is the best.
This one's kind of random. A single channel pipette or multi-channel pipette?
Oh, multi-channel. As long
That
as
would
the
be
tips
mine
work.
too. Yeah, that's mine too, multi-channel. And then coming into work late or coming into work early?
Well, we know the answer. I always come in later. You guys are here for like an hour and a half before I get to work.
And then do you tend to procrastinate or do you get things done right away?
Depends on what those things are. Usually, if it's like, I usually get things done right away. I'm more like, I don't want to let this sit around.
Yes.
But the things that I do procrastinate on, I procrastinate on a lot. Like, I just like wait. I'm like, I clearly don't want to do this task. And I push it off and I push it off. But most things I tackle pretty quickly.
And then completing electronic paperwork or hard copy paperwork?
Oddly, I actually kind of like writing things down, even though I have terrible handwriting and I'm always like, ugh. And in the end, the electronic paperwork is much easier for our workflow and stuff. But I don't know, there's something about filling out like a list.
Hard copy.
I just kind of like, I don't know, you're like, here's the work I did. Because I also really liked workbooks when I was really, like in school. I was so excited to like have a workbook and fill it out. So I think it goes back to that.
And then the last one is day full of meetings or day full of lab work?
Lab work.
Easy.
Yeah, again, because at the end you're like, here's my tasks, this is what I did, I have accomplished something. Some days at the end of meetings I'm like, what did I do? What have I done today? I mean, like, I'm sure we made decisions and made some progress on things, but after, occasionally I'm like, no, I need time to actually do work in between meetings.
Yes. Well, that's all that I have. Unless you have anything else.
No, I can't think of anything else.
Thank you for sitting down with us. I think my audience will definitely appreciate having this perspective of someone besides me who's only been in this for like 2 years.
Well, if you have any more questions, let me know. I'm always happy to answer them. And it's always like, I don't know, I've always been excited about science and learning, and like sometimes you get places and you're like, oh, this is much more boring than I thought it was going to be, and then other times you're like, oh, this is really cool. And I guess that's one thing I can say, like the transition from academia to industry has been really interesting because with academia, there's a lot of freedom and you have a lot of time and you can really work on drilling down to try and answer a question. But since I was never really involved in any like super, I don't want to say famous, but like really well-funded large projects that were going to get sort of not the flashiest of projects, right? That we're going to get into like a nature paper or like something with that level of prestige.
Yeah.
I worked on some very cool things, but at some point you kind of reach a place where you're like, well, maybe I will contribute to the paper that we write and my name will be on it. And then maybe someone sometime will read it and it will be helpful. But it is definitely a lot less broad. Or I'm sorry, more specialized. Whereas here I feel like the being able to see the direct impact, or at least, since we don't necessarily see any of the patients, but having marketing and our clinical team bring back stories to us about patients that are actually living longer because of tests that we made has been a very rewarding experience and a very worthwhile transition in my opinion. So that's been helping to keep me motivated when things got weird over COVID times. Like we've gone through upsizes and downsizes, and that's been a very good driving force. That and like generally speaking, the team is fun to work with and pretty good at getting things done.
Yeah.
So that's my extra addition, 2 cents. Thanks for asking me questions.
You're welcome. Thank you again.